The Obersalzberg in 1937. Under the supreme supervision of Reichsleiter Martin Bormann, the once so well-known and popular high-altitude health resort was transformed into a security complex hermetically sealed off from the outside world. Over 30 buildings were bought up and demolished by Bormann. Hitler's house, Wachenfeld, was rebuilt twice until the representative Berghof was created. These pictures show the construction of the SS barrack on the Obersalzberg in 1937. It consisted of a crew building, a service vehicle hall, and a sports hall. Initially, the outbreak of the war did little to change Bormann's building activities on the mountain. Only when the German cities were increasingly bombed by the Allies, the situation on Obersalzberg also changed. A ring of anti-aircraft gun emplacements around the Berchtesgaden Basin was built to protect the Obersalzberg from air raids. In 1943, the extensive construction of air raid shelters began, a measure delayed for years on the Obersalzberg mountain in order not to alarm the public. Highly qualified mining engineers were commissioned to connect the individual buildings underground. Under the most difficult and dangerous conditions, the mountain was wrested yard by yard, and only 12 months later, under the strictest secrecy, most of the project was completed. From the original plan to connect only Hitler's Berghof to an air raid shelter, a major project had emerged, which once again was the brainchild of the exorbitant builder, Martin Bormann. Without a doubt, an underground command center had been created which, thanks to its well-thought-out planning, outshone all comparable facilities in the Reich. April 1945. The anti-aircraft gun emplacements around the Obersalzberg have been on alert for a long time. However, nobody knew the Americans had had a detailed plan of attack available to them since June 1944. From these plans of attack, the systematic destruction of the Obersalzberg and the Kelstein area is revealed. The Americans had erroneously declared the Eagle's Nest to be the most important target. Hitler's Berghof, which is eventually called the Wachenfels instead of the Wachenfeld, here was considered a secondary target. These documents show that the Allies had only very little information about the Führergebiet. On Wednesday, April 25, 1945, the planned attack became a reality after months of postponement. Nearly 400 Royal Air Force Landcast bombers flew a 3-hour attack, dropping 1,200-ton bombs over the Obersalzberg. After the attack, a picture of devastation emerged. On the right in the picture, the destroyed side wing of the Berghof behind it, the remains of the country house of Martin Bormann. The SS barracks received several hits, as did the Platterhof behind it, which had served as a military hospital in the last days of the war. Hitler's Berghof was badly damaged, but none of the nearly 400 Lancaster bombers took a direct hit. Shortly after the bombing, the looters came in droves to the mountain and dragged away whatever was useful and had survived the attack. The Obersalzberg today. Much grass has grown over the ruins blown up in the 1950s, and only little reminds us that the entire German Reich was once ruled from here. Again and again, the ruins of the Berghof have been removed and filled in since the blasting in 1952, and today only the retaining at the back is visible. Many tourists interested in history keep exploring the now completely overgrown wall remains of the historic buildings on the Obersalzberg. But what the visitor only sees to a small extent are the extensive underground bunker labyrinths that have survived a long time, mostly undamaged. Since 1987, the Obersalzberg Registration Office has been involved in research and surveying of these underground facilities. A private organization consisting of honorary official members has been able to collect and evaluate considerable knowledge of these underground buildings since its foundation. In August 1990, the organization was engaged in evaluating a former secret plan, which reappeared after 45 years. This plan showed there should be an SS tunnel system about 30 meters below the normal level of the Platterhoff Bunker. Since the construction work back then was a well-kept secret, there are hardly any plans left from this time. This plan was all the more important for the recording office. It was still uncertain whether and to what extent the marked tunnel system of the SS was expanded. It was found that one of the conveyor exits was about 20 meters next to the former crew building of the SS barracks. After completion, the incline staircase was to connect the bunker system with the basement of the barracks. Another possible access was a shaft about 30 meters deep in the northern part of the Platterhoff Bunker. Plans of this area were immediately drawn up on an enlarged scale. At the same time, another team from the registration office was commissioned with the surface survey. This team had the task of locating the filling shaft through which the entrance was later to take place. During the research, the former site manager of the Platterhoff Bunker, Josef Pretzl, could be found. To our surprise, it turned out that the 85-year-old engineer was also employed as a foreman, and therefore had the greatest insight into the secret construction project of all those involved.
At first, Hitler's bunker was built. Then Bormann said, we needed shelter for his people too. And so the bunker complex was made bigger and bigger. The number of people in the Platterhof kept growing and needed space. So more and more galleries were blasted out and then supported with the addition of concrete. We were working in 2 shifts, 10 hours a day. The transportation to the construction site took about 1 hour one way. When the day shift arrived, the night shift was transported back. And in the morning, the soup was served, which took about 30 minutes. On average, each shift worked 10 hours. We had no plans because everything was very confidential. We had to ask again and again what should be done next. Then, bit by bit, another tunnel was added because there was not enough space for all the people from the Platterhof.
vorhandenen Leute, vor allem vom Platterhof.
The SS company was in charge of the rock work and the blasting.
Beauftragt, die Felsarbeiten, die Sprengungen auszuführen.
And my workers from the Mall Construction Company did all the construction work.
Arbeitsgruppe, die restlichen Ausbauarbeiten durchgeführt.
A few weeks later, we meet again with Josef Pretzl. Once again, the engineer found his way to the Obersalzberg. We hoped that we could persuade him to climb down again, with the film team, to the place he had last seen in April 1945. Today we have a special guest here at the Obersalzberg, Engineer Josef Pretzl, who was in charge of constructing the most important and most complicated bunker complex here at the Obersalzberg, the Platterhoff, guest house, and SS tunnels. Mr. Pretzl, how long has it been since you were on the Obersalzberg?
I was here until the end of the war, from October 1943 until April 1945.
So you have experienced the entire bunker construction from the very beginning. It will be very interesting when, about 50 years later, we go down there again and explain to us on the spot what happened down there.
Yes, I would love to do that.
At the time of the shooting, the Platterhoff and the surrounding area were still under American administrative jurisdiction. In 1996, the U.S. forces returned these properties to the Free State of Bavaria in a desolate state. In October 1999, the Obersalzberg documentation was opened below the Platterhof on the ruins of the former party guest house. It is a permanent exhibition on the history of Obersalzberg and the Nazi dictatorship. Today, this is the only possible entrance to the Platterhoff bunker, which has been partially open to the public. But back in 1991, half a century has passed since the engineer stood on these stairs for the last time. But at that time, as the chief construction manager of the project, which was called Platterhoff, Guest House, SS Stolen. Mr. Pretzl, we are now in the largest room of this bunker system. What kind of room is that?
This was the machine room. The two diesel engines were set up here. The smaller motor was delivered fully assembled to the guest house below the Platterhof. And from there, we transported him into the bunker just in time before the air raid took place. Here are the legacies of our electrician. Here were the wires for the lamps attached.
It is difficult to remember details after such a long time, but it was not a big problem for Josef Pretzl to find his way through the ramified tunnels of the Platterhoff bunker, so he led us closer and closer to the place from which the unexplored shaft led into the depths. Because of the newly discovered plan, it had to be possible to access the SS tunnel from this shaft at a depth of about 30 meters and not, as had been mistakenly assumed for years, have a connection to Hitler's bunker. What do you know about this shaft?
The SS Tunnel Construction Company blasted this shaft out.
According to the engineer, during the construction period, a wooden staircase existed and reached down to the bottom of the shaft, but it was removed by SS soldiers in April 1945. Due to the dangerous nature of the shaft, an exploration from this side seemed to be too difficult, but the situation will force us to do so at a later time. Here, near today's bus departure point for the shuttle buses to the Kelstein, the second access marked on the map has been located in the meantime by surveying the terrain. Since the site was still under American administrative jurisdiction at the time of the exploration, the subsequent excavation work was carried out under the supervision and assistance of the U.S. Criminal Investigation Commands. Here, in the middle of these inaccessible bushes, according to the calculations, the only possible access to the underground bunker system of the SS barracks had to be next to the shaft in the Platterhoff bunker. All other accesses had not been available since the bombing in April 1945. In fact, a little later, one employee found a small hole under the dense foliage from which a strong draft could be felt. He had found the right place and immediately began with the excavation work. At first, sheet metal roof parts jammed in the ground prevented rapid exposure of the access. Finally, the entrance was large enough, and the employees squeezed through the narrow opening. As it later turned out, it was not, as originally assumed, a delivery exit, but a filling shaft for concrete. The shaft meets the connecting corridor that was to connect a tunnel system with the SS barracks at a depth of about 8 meters. The wooden supports and the roughly blasted gallery clearly show this part of the bunker system was not yet completed by the end of the war. However, this tunnel had collapsed after about 60 meters. Perhaps this too was the work of the SS men who wanted to make it impossible to penetrate from the other side as well. The disappointment was great, and we had to give up.
Blindes Ende.
That'll work.
Unten nichts. Geht nichts weiter. Ist alles verschüttet, leider Gottes.
Now the only option left was to rappel down a 30-meter deep shaft to the Platterhoff bunker. About 2 meters below the barred door, we found an access possibility to the shaft in a supply tunnel. We were all aware of the danger of this undertaking. After the rope protections were fixed, the descent could begin. The rope ladder was to make the descent easier.
Wie schaut's aus? Verwickelt? weit schätzt du, dass es runtergeht?
15 Meter ungefähr.
Wie schaut's aus unten?
Also das geht jetzt noch bis zum nächsten Podest. Etwa 6 Meter runter, aber das ist genauso verfahren wie das da. Lass mal ein bisschen hoch sein. Gut. Da geht es ungefähr nochmal 10 Meter runter. Da bricht man durch wahrscheinlich.
Here you can clearly see the remains of the wooden staircase that led down the shaft. The humidity in this section of the bunker caused the wood to rot, and the remains of the stairs made the descent much more difficult. Even during the descent, the rope ladder proved indispensable.
Ja. Stopp! Alles klar, Lampe, stopp!
Finally, we reached the bottom of the shaft. Men and material had been lowered down by rope, and the generator for power supply was in place in a side corridor. The team is now split into 2 groups, and the exploration of the tunnel could begin. A connection could still be maintained by radio. In an unfinished tunnel, the team headed for the SS barracks. A heavy iron door blocked the way into a side cavern. Besides the sparse remains of a headphone, we found nothing in this fully developed cavern. Since the end of the war, we were the first people to be in this bunker system. With a metal detector, we slowly groped our way forward, because ammunition or other war material hidden in the rubble could become insidious traps. An old carbide lamp. Again and again, we came across new tunnel sections whose development stages range from rock excavation to the finished cavern. The impressions we got while exploring these underground passages were indescribable. There was no doubt that since the end of the war, we were the first to encounter this, until then, secret bunker system. What had happened here? What fates had met their end here? The fragile rock must have claimed many a human life. After more than half a century, the bunker had awakened from its long sleep, but many questions will probably never be answered. Soon our headlights will be extinguished, and the bunker will sink into the darkness of history again. In a side entrance, the first group came across a large warehouse with alternate components that were to be used for heating and ventilation of the facility. This is further proof we were the first to enter this bunker since the end of the war, because usually all building materials have been taken by looters, as in all other comparable facilities in the Obersalzberg. At this point, it is important to explain that the end of the war did not come with the invasion of U.S. troops on May 5, 1945. But in fact did not officially take place until September 2, 1945, with the so-called VJ Day. After the bombing, the Obersalzberg was plundered for several weeks.
Wir sind also jetzt ca. 242,6 Meter in den Stollen vorgedrungen. Da ist noch alles für die Fuß Geh nochmal hin. Ja, genau.
Even from a distance, we could see the searchlights of the second group. The meeting took place as planned. Together, the way leads us towards SS barracks. The main corridor becomes increasingly damp, and bizarre center formations have been deposited on the floors and walls. The closer we get to the SS barracks, the more often rockfalls obstruct the way. This is a common sight, because in many bunkers on the Obersalzberg, corridors and tunnels have been blocked from collapse due to the heavy bombings in April 1945. A short time later, we arrived at the place that had already blocked our way from the other side when we first tried to enter the facility through the concrete filling shaft. Our exploration of the SS bunker complex had come to its end here. But the exploration was worthwhile because besides some interesting relics from the construction period, we had also discovered two new entrances to the SS tunnel system, the existence of which we did not know about before. Together, we transported all the equipment back to the shaft. For a better understanding of this bunker inspection, here is an explanation based on the plan. The blue hatched area in the lower middle of the picture shows the former bus departure point to the Kelstein. On the right edge of the picture, shown here in brown, you can see the ground plan for the former SS barracks. At the top left, the southern Part B of Hitler's bunker under the Berghof. On the lower left, the bunker system of the Platterhoff. The green part represents the so far unexplored bunker system of the SS. On the right, the failed attempt to enter the facility via the concrete filling shaft. A successful descent was made through the shaft on the left side, which connects the Platterhoff bunker with the SS tunnel system about 30 meters below. From the bottom of the shaft, a systematic exploration of the entire facility was carried out until a massive collapse made further exploration impossible.